Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and in this video what I want to do is talk about local storage. Just kind of give you um, a nice helping of local storage and session storage. And what local and session storage are a way of storing data in the user's browser. So instead of using like a database that's like hosted on some server external to the user's computer, you're storing it right there in their computer. And in general, if I remember the limitations correctly, each entry in local or session storage has a maximum size of 5 megabytes. And so you can store that much data. It's generally you're storing text data here. Okay, so you're just literally storing a string, and then you can save that string, bring that string back whenever you need to. The differences are local storage is permanent. So if you add something to the local storage, it's there till you delete it. Yeah, it's there till you delete it. And then two, session storage is there for the browser session, which means once the browser closes, um, anything in session storage gets wiped out. Okay, but it's there as long as their browser is open. So those are sort of like the two big differences between session storage and local storage. Okay, and yeah, so let's do an example. So I'm going to create like an index.html here. I'm just going to do everything. I'm going to do all my JavaScript inside the HTML because that way we're not worrying about having to connect a bunch of files. But let's just do something really simple. So I'm just going to create like an aside. Let's just make it a div. And inside the div, we're going to have an input tag. So input type equals text. Okay. And I'm going to turn on the light so that way this all looks, I don't look so dark and muggy there in the corner. There we go. That should look a lot better. Okay. Okay, so we have our input tag. And then I'm going to have a button. A button for saving. So we need to kind of give that an ID. So we'll give it an ID equals save. And we'll have an ID for button. ID equals save or load. And let's just take a look at how this looks like in the browser. So I'm going to open this with Live Server, which is an extension. So if you don't have the Live Server extension, you can always just click right over here in VS Code, Visual Studio Code, and download that extension. Okay, but I'm going to right click, open with Live Server. And there we go. So we got this input right here. And my goal is to be able to like type in, you can see like a website always restarts from scratch every time you refresh the page. Like whatever the HTML file is originally, that's where the page starts when you refresh. So theoretically, if I type in cheese here, that's going to disappear when I refresh the page. What I'd like to do is be able to like save what I typed in there and then load it on a future view of the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up DevTools so that you can right click and hit inspect to open up DevTools regardless of what operating system you're on. And under this section called application, there's local storage and session storage. So you can actually see like all the different ways you can store or track data in the browser here. That's what this page does. It says, okay, here's the web page you're on. Here are all the different ways you could have, stored data like cookies, IndexedDB, WebSQL. I'm not quite sure what WebSQL is. I'll have to go learn more about that. Trust tokens, that's kind of a newer thing. Cache storage. There's also a bunch of stuff here, like service workers if you're trying to do like progressive web apps. All sorts of really fun things here. So I'm going to go use local storage. Right now you'll see like local storage has, well, there's this one input that's from an exercise I did yesterday, so let me delete that. Okay, but there's no data in session storage or local storage. And no data, oh, there's this, but that's not something I created in session storage. Okay, so I can take a look at that there. So what I want to do is I want to create something in there. Okay, so now I'm going to create my JavaScript tag. And what I'm going to want to do is, first thing I want to do is just kind of just take this input and these buttons and save them in variables so I can just easily refer to them. So we're going to say the input button const input equals document.querySelector. and I'm going to be targeting the input tag. There's only one, so I should grab the one that I want. Const save button, that's going to equal document.querySelector, and that's going to equal the element with the ID of save. And const load equals document.querySelector, and the thing with the ID of load. So I have those, so I can easily refer to them as needed. And I am going to write object. So this is going to be called like my application state. So the idea is like this is the state of my application. So any data I want to track, I'll put in this object. And what I want to do is just track the text of the input. So I'm just going to make a property called text, which starts out as an empty string. Okay, awesome. So there's like sort of my setup. And then I want to create a function for like loading the data and a function for saving the data. Okay, so we'll create a function, and one function will be called save data. Okay, and essentially what this function is going to do, first thing it's going to do, it's going to update the application state. So it's going to take the application state and takes its text property and update it to whatever the input is. So input.value, because it's an input box, so it's the value property. Then after updating that property, then what it's going to do is turn it to a JSON string. So basically, because the thing is, again, you can't save the JavaScript object, but you can save the JSON string. Okay? So state, we'll call it state as JSON. Okay, I just realized I'm doing a snake case out of habit because I've been writing a lot of like Scala and Java and whatnot more recently, and Python. So I'm not doing camel case there out of habit. Funny, when I do Python videos, I accidentally do everything as camel case. Okay, state as JSON. So what I'm going to do is, first let's actually make sure we add the const to this because we're declaring this variable. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use json.stringify. That takes a JavaScript object or array and turns it into a JSON string. So I'm going to say, take the application state, turn that to a string. Okay, and once we turn that into a string, I'm going to go and want to save it in local storage. So I'm going to say window.localStorage. It could be sessionStorage, doesn't matter. It's the same. They both work the same way. And I'm going to say set item. So I'm going to say in local storage, I want you to set an item called, we'll call it app state. And app state will equal the string of state as JSON. Okay. So basically, anytime I hit save data, it's going to go through those steps. Take whatever's in the input, update the state object, and then save that object in JavaScript. Okay. And that generally would be the easiest way to handle save, because that way if you have this one object, then you can have a bunch of other functions that mutate that object, and then whenever you need to save, you just stringify that object, and then your load function would just like, you'll see it will load that object, and then you just make sure that you set all the appropriate values to that. So load data, so let's load the data. Okay, and in this case, what I want to do is the opposite. Okay, so first I want to do is I'm going to load the data. So I'm going to say, first we're going to declare state as JSON. So essentially, state as JSON comes first. Now, why does it like that? What am I doing wrong here? Oh, I see what I did wrong. The parentheses, this should not be in the parentheses. So X, there we go. State as JSON. And that now we're going to get that string out of local storage. So I'm going to say window.localStorage.getItem. And I'm going to say, hey, get me the thing that I have saved under app state. Now what happened? Now here's the thing. I might use this function at a time. Like someone might try to load something when there is no data in local storage. So what I want to do is just do a quick check. So if state as JSON. Oops. because if that key, like if I never actually created this key in local storage yet, it's going to be undefined, which will be falsy, and it'll just skip this if statement. But if there actually is a string in there, like I have saved data in the past, then it's going to be true, and then I can actually like carry out what I'm about to do. So if state as JSON is truthy, meaning there's actually data there, okay, then the next thing I'm going to do is turn that JSON um, back into a JavaScript object. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say loaded const loaded data equals window JSON.parse, because that's going to take the JSON string and turn it back into a JavaScript object. Okay, so then I'm going to run this as state as JSON. And then once I have that object, I am then going to go update the original object. So application state dot text will equal state as JSON dot text. Okay, and then we're also going to update the input so that way it matches. Input dot value equals JSON equals application state dot text. Okay, and then that should update the screen. So now we just need to attach these functions to those buttons. Okay, so now I'm going to just say, hey, the load button, save dot add event listener. What I want to do is that when you click on the save button, I want to run the save data function. And on the load button, load dot add event listener, when you click on that button, I want to run the load function. Okay, and let's load data. There we go. So now we should at least be able to have the save and load buttons working. So if I go here, I'm going to type in cheese. Now if I refresh the page without saving, so it just gets blanked out. And then if I click load, nothing happens. Now if I click cheese, I hit save. Okay. Save. Oh, looks like I spelled document wrong. Here it is. Document. Okay, so it's always good to look at the errors to kind of see where you need to fix things. So let's try this again. Cheese. I hit save, and let me go back to application so we can see this get saved in memory. So you see right now local storage has nothing, and I hit save, and see that gets saved to local storage. And see I'm saving that object and saying the value of text is cheese. Now if I refresh the page, see this is empty again, but I can now load it. Ah, I got undefined. So that means I made a mistake somewhere here. So let's take a look. Okay, we loaded the data, that's fine. Application state dot text equals state as JSON dot text. That looks like it should be correct, saying that this is undefined. So let me just take a look at my, oh, that looks like it should be correct. So let's just test this out. Let's just test, like, is my loaded data what I think it is? Console.log, loaded data, and then let's confirm how it parsed. So I'm going to console log that. I want to hit load for the console so I can see the console log. And yeah, that's correct. Text cheese, good. So input value equals application state dot text. So that should be correct. Input value, and then input is the input from over here. So JSON.parse. What I will do is I'll just cut straight to the chase and just change this to state as JSON as text. And let's see here, does that work better? That's weird. And like we see that the text property is cheese. Input dot value should, if you set that, that should Oh wait, status JSON is the original string. So I want to use actually the loaded data variable. Okay, so let's try that again. Okay, there it works. Okay. So basically, again, I can save. I can be like, blah, save it. And then in the future instance, I can now load it. So you can imagine like if you built a game and you want to save like stats or like the state of the game, you could save it in local storage as like a JavaScript object, and then you can rebuild the state of the game by loading that object and then updating the state of what's in the DOM. But what if you don't want to have them click on a save and a load button? What you can do is we can just, well, the load, we could just happen right at the top. Because I have that if statement, it'll do all the right appropriate checks. Okay, so I can do something like load, just call load data right here. So that way it runs when the program runs. So now if every time I refresh the page, okay, see it's updating that input box right away. So now if I change it and then hit refresh, see it's still loading it to what the previous save was. And then if I hit cheese and I save it again, and then I refresh the page, okay, see now it's loading the new data. That's pretty much how local storage works. Again, it would be the same thing with session storage. Session storage, again, would be only existing while the browser is open, but this can be a really useful place to save like any kind of, for general applications, just like maybe metadata for like tracking, like, someone's logged in. You wouldn't want to put any sensitive information here that could give them like higher level backend access, so that way they can't like delete your database or anything like that. But like let's just like a true false, like the user's logged in kind of thing, or some basic user data, but not like sensitive user data, just like kind of things you would need for UI purposes. Stuff like that is fine to put in local storage. Just keep in mind that like JavaScript can access local storage, so that's a security vulnerability. So that means if someone could, sneak some JavaScript onto your page, they can then access that local storage. So that's kind of different than like what you can do with cookies. Cookies can be set up to be sort of like HTTP only cookies, which means like JavaScript cannot access them. But cookies can only be set from the server. So in that case, like in my front end, my JavaScript in the browser, I cannot like create a cookie or change a cookie. That's gonna have to be done through the headers on my responses from my backend server. So it's a different tool for different things. But oftentimes we're talking about like authorization tokens and stuff like that. An HTTP only token can be sometimes a safer route to go. But with that, yeah, enjoy. Hopefully that gives you a better idea of how to use local storage and what it does and the process. But again, always remember that you're only saving a string here. So in this case where I'm saving JavaScript objects in local storage, I always have to stringify it before I save it to turn it into a JSON string. And then when I load up that JSON string, I have to make the extra step of parsing the string to turn it back into a JavaScript object. And the reason I keep it as a JavaScript object is so that way I can save a lot of things in one entry in the local storage. Because you could just create a bunch of individual keys, but that gets a little tricky to keep track of. So just having this big object that just kind of tracks everything can be easier. Again, maximum 5 megabytes. So if you're talking about a lot of data you're tracking, you may want to break it up into a few different objects that cover different areas, like a stats object, location object, or something like that if you're talking about like a game. But otherwise, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, learned a little bit how to look at this stuff in data dev tools, and enjoy.